Hi everybody, my name is Estela Cedillo and today we're going to be learning about dual language learners. So some of the definitions we need to be aware of are dual language learners, also referred to as DLLs, and they are students who acquire two or more languages simultaneously or learning a second language while continuing to master their first language, or another word for first language would be home language or native language. They're all the same. Another definition would be bilingual education, and it is a term that refers to the teaching of academic content in two languages, in a native language and then in a second language. Something we can think about is all children have the innate ability to learn multiple languages. The first 6 years of a child's life are an ideal time to acquire a second language. So we're going to take a look at the rise of population. In the last several decades, the population of young DLLs has tripled and now accounts for 25% of all children in the United States. Then we're going to look at some statistics from Head Start. As of 2011, the Head Start program, 59% of them are racial or ethnic minority families. 37% of them are Hispanic, Latino origin. And 30% dual language learners. And an important statistic right here in the corner is about the graduation rate from immigrant families. So 40% of immigration students arriving from Mexico graduate high school. That to me was very interesting because I am part of that. I was brought here when I was 5, and you go to school, you learn, you do what you have to do to graduate, and you just think it's something routinely, like you have to do it, never realizing that a lot of people that are in the same situation as you do not get to graduate. So I was lucky enough to be in that 40%, but there's 60% that don't graduate high school. Not college. We're not talking about getting an associate's or a bachelor. We're talking about just having a graduate degree. Not a graduate from college, but a high school diploma. So that is something that we really need to work on to make better. So one thing, all dual language learners have one thing in common: mastering the linguistic component of several different languages. Let's look at some factors. So we have social cultural factors, which is children with immigrant parents are more likely to live in two-parent families. Immigrant mothers are more likely to be married, less likely to be depressed, and have large families. On the other hand, we have the social economic factors, and they are the dual language learners tend to be from immigrant families. 40% tend to have experienced poverty, which is a lot, 40%. So let's look at the teacher. And she would also be known as the model because she would model the English language. So the teacher must be bilingual to a certain degree. This way the student is able to express themselves in their home language. It is important that the teacher speak in one language only and that they have a native-like competence in a language in which they teach. This way the teacher can speak naturally and correctly. And we'll learn this through, if you're in bilingual education, you learn that um, there's a model when you're learning English, the English language, you're always gonna have a model, and that model is the one that's gonna teach you. Or if you learn about it in the like the little kids growing up and learning to speak. Um, the mother or the teacher are the models. They're modeling the English language. I remember that. Sorry. Okay, so let's continue and we'll look at language approaches. Um, so the English only program, it's where it's English exclusively. Students are to learn English from the beginning, and any support for the child's home language is intended to merely help the child cope with an all English classroom. So basically, you're teaching them in English. You're trying to get as much English in there as possible. And unless there's like something they don't understand, then you can translate to them or help them in their home language. But other than that, everything is in English completely. So the other approach is the bilingual program division, which is in the division of time between English and the home language. And there's a bridge, which is the home language bridge to English. Students are to become bilingual and biliterate. So there's two approaches to that. One of them is 90-10 approach, which is 90% in home language and 10% in English language, increasing the amount over the years. So you start out 90-10, which is 90% in home language and 10% in English, and then as long as you're understanding it, then you keep going like 80-20 and then 70-30 until they completely they would get to master the English language. The other approach is 50-50 approach, which is divided the interaction time roughly equally between English and the home language. And this approach describes the way for children not to miss any important curricula is for doing the 50-50 approach. So you do 50 in the curricula like that is really important, and some of the subjects that they don't think is highly important would be like art, physical education. So they would do that in the home language. So they would understand the curriculum in the English language. So we're going to go to the acquisition of the English language. And there's two ways described in our textbook. The first approach is the simultaneously acquisition, learning two languages at the same time. And then the other approach is the sequential approach, which is learning a second language after the first language is relatively well established, which would be the home language, basically. Let's look at some of the benefits. So one of the benefits is the executive function abilities, which is working the memory, inhibitory control, and attention to relevant versus irrelevant tasks. The other benefit would be cognitive development, then social emotional skills, linguistic advantage, which is you can learn more than one language and then you already know two or more languages. You establish a strong cultural identity and confidence of ethnic groups. You have strong ties to immediate and extended family. Favorable attitude towards other ethnic and linguistic groups. And then you have advantages in adulthood. So let's talk about strong ties to immediate and extended family. And I think this is one of really important one as far as your family. There's some students that have a home language and then they go to school, they learn English, and they kind of forget their home language while mastering their English language. So they have maybe like grandparents that they don't bond with because they don't understand their home language anymore. And it's really kind of sad. So you want to make sure that they keep it and it helps them with their family. The advantages in adulthood, which is would be like a career, like they could have a really good job and it would pay them more, or they would be able to travel with that language to that part of the area and they would be able to speak it. Okay, let's keep going, and we're going to cognitive development. And it says, do children really risk their psychological well being? And it says, children do not suffer psychological damage when exposed to a new language as long as their first language is being valued and understood. Second language is sometimes connected to frustration and pressure because their first language is deemed not useful and not valid in an educational system. When children are encouraged to speak home languages, children perceive the new language as an enrichment. The fear of trauma is often a reflection of the parent's own reluctance and fear to communicate in new language. So, to an important way to make the parent feel valuable in these situations would be to have a relationship with them and put them at ease and have an understanding where they don't feel inferior because they don't know the English language. And it would be really helpful for the student so he would be able to master it. And maybe the student can teach the parent so they won't feel like the student is not part of the family because he's going to school and learning another language. Okay, and we're going to go to recommendations in classroom settings. The most important one is respectful. A respectful classroom where language is respected, culture, ethnic group, skin color, any any physical aspect, or you just make sure that everybody's respected in your classroom. You have to make sure your bilingual interaction space is a welcoming environment, vibrant, and learning community. You have to make sure your bilingual identity is established. You want to make sure strong connections to outside world. And an example that was given to me in the research journal article that I read was that the teacher actually brought in a medical card into the classroom and made copies for the students so they can fill it out. They not only are learning the English vocabulary in that medical card, they're learning how to fill it out. And it said that one of the students actually ended up going to the hospital with the mom and helped fill out the same medical card. So she came back and she told the teacher how her exercise helped her while she was in the hospital with her mom. It helped her translate, it helped her fill it out, and it was just a bond that they built from there on. For students not to feel out of place, make sure a large portion of the children are new to the second language. Indicators of inferiority would be to place a small number of children in a classroom where the minority of the children are competent in a second language. So another thing we can talk about is the wait time. Time allowed for the child to come up with a response. And dual language learners, it is very normal for a student to be asked a question and there's like maybe a silence there where the student is trying to grasp, understand, come up with the answer, and then respond. And most of the time, teachers don't want to wait, which it's understandable because it's, you know, you only have a limited amount of time, but you have to make sure that the student gets enough wait time for them to understand and respond, and not make them feel like they don't understand or they're less, or sometimes you can make them look dumb in front of the class. Something to remember is the first language loss, which is subtractive language experience. It happens when a child starts to become proficient in the English language and there's a lack of a home language somewhere, maybe in the classroom or at home, and you want to make sure that that doesn't happen, because your end goal is for them to be dual language, for them to understand both of them. Okay, so we're going to keep going, and we're going to go to differences, not delays. Features of a dual language learner. Speech and language development may look delayed. Slower progress in each language. Smaller vocabulary, but total vocabulary from both languages similar. Takes longer to recall words from memory. Lower scores on verbal fluency tests. So these are things that you can look for when they're learning. And like in our case, we would look at kids going into learning the English language. If they learn in at home, they learn their home language, and at school they learn their English language. And these are things you can look for, but you have to remember that most of these differences are temporary and disappear as young DLLs become more proficient in both of their languages. So they might start out this way, but in the long run, they're going to master both languages. So there's nothing you worry about. You just watch them. So I came up with a couple of federal programs in the United States that really are targeted towards dual language learners. And these programs help subsidize services to young children. One of them is Child Care and Development Block Grant. Then there's Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And then there's Head Start. And Head Start is it's for underprivileged kids under the age of 3. They're serving 1.1 million children and invested approximately $8 billion in 2012 for early educational services. 40 states fund pre-kindergarten, which serves 1.3 million children. So in Texas, not everybody gets to go to pre-kindergarten. Low-income families and Texas Star recipients, but it's not just public for everybody, which is something we should really change, because we know that the younger they are, the more education they get, it helps them get better, and it helps them not be on the low side of the spectrum. So here's something for teachers. So NABE is the National Association for Bilingual Education, and it was established in 1975. The National Association for Bilingual Education has been a non-profit membership organization that works to advocate for educational equity and excellence for bilingual, multilingual students in a global society. They help improve bilingual educators with more high-quality professional development opportunities. They improve instructional practices for linguistic and culturally diverse children. They secure adequate funding for the program serving limited English proficient students. And they keep the right of language minority Americans clearly in focus as states and communities move forward with educational reforms. So they really help across the United States. And maybe it's something, if you're going to be a bilingual educator, you want to look into. So my end goals to be is to be a balanced bilingual. And it would be